evening to everyone, and thank you for letting me speak at this seminar. I would like to thank Professor Gazzano for her help. I would like to start with a disclaimer to serve as a captatio benevolentiae. I specialize primarily in Roman history. While I do study a Greek author who played an important part in transmitting Greek history and identity, it isn't Herodotus. Since my master's, and particularly while working on my PhD at the Sorbonne over the last 6 years, PhD can take a long time in France, I have become interested in Plutarch. Do we really need another thesis on Plutarch? You may be wondering. He is, of course, an author who has been extensively studied before me by important specialists, but some aspects of his work remain as yet little investigated. In particular, his relationship with history. Although he wrote biographies, Plutarch tells us a lot about history. And I wondered what kind of relationship he had with the historical period that he lived in. An event from the reign of Trajan had particular resonance with certain incidents in parallel lives. I am referring to the Persian campaign. Between 114 and 117, the Optimus Princeps had undertaken an ambitious expedition into the east, allowing him to reach the Persian Gulf and create new and rather short-lived provinces. However, Plutarch was at the time likely busy drafting the parallel lives, is silent on the matter. I've always found it surprising. Plutarch almost never makes reference to his own era. And yet, we know that he was in contact with several members of the Greco-Roman political and cultural elite. These personal relationships, resulting from his trips in Greece and to Rome, have an important place in his literary work, and they are transported into the literature as they play a fundamental role in his work, since Plutarch's texts are responses to his Greek and Roman friends. This is most evident in the Quaestiones Conviviales, the long work where Plutarch details conversations with his educated friends, both in Greece and in Rome. This split between Greece and Rome, which invites comparison, is furthermore a characteristic trait of Plutarch's work. It is visible in several of the Moralia and, of course, in the parallel lives. This aspect undoubtedly represents one of the strongest links with the contemporary world. On the one hand, the interest in parallels between the Greek world and the Roman one could be taken as a type of a parlor game in vogue between the late 1st and early 2nd centuries. On the other hand, by avoiding a blunt juxtaposition and opting for a synthesis between the Greek and Roman wars, Plutarch joins a cultural and even political project already suggested by other Greek authors before him. But apart from this connection with contemporary intellectuals and politicians, looking for mentions of the historical events of his time, or even allusions to the political landscape proves frustrating. I wondered if I could find traces of the reign of Trajan, and most of all, his ambitious Persian campaign, by other means. I therefore decided to analyze the accounts of the campaigns against the Persians in the whole corpus, the disastrous expeditions of Crassus and Antonius, as well as the abandoned plans of Lucullus and Caesar. These incidents received a surprising amount of space in Plutarch's Roman Lives. Proof, according to specialists who have studied this text, that when describing the triumvir's misadventures in the East, Plutarch was thinking of Trajan and his Persian campaign. But while going through these accounts, I realized that for Plutarch, the Roman-Persian campaigns could in some way be seen as the last act of a story begun much earlier, and I wanted to uncover it in full. This led me initially, unsurprisingly, to Alexander the Great's campaign against the Persians, a source of inspiration for politicians in the late Roman Republic, and indeed any self-respecting conqueror. But thanks to the analysis in Life of Lucullus, I was able to note that for Plutarch, the Romans fighting against the Persians are only retracing the footsteps of Greeks such as Cimon and Agesilaus, who left to fight the Persians for Greece and for the Greeks in Asia. In this narrative grouping, accounts of the Persian wars are fundamental. They are the chronological point of departure and also the archetypical foundation for the antagonism between East and West, providing the themes that Plutarch invokes in nearly every story of a war in the East. If the Persian wars are the archetype, then Herodotus is the father, a slightly intrusive parent figure to be inspired by, while at the same time rebelled against. Plutarch has a conflicted relationship with him, which I found interesting and less rhetorical than might be assumed. Beyond the many references elsewhere in the corpus, this conflict is most visible in three works: the life of Aristeides, the life of Themistocles, and On the Malice of Herodotus. The latter text is part of the tradition of criticisms of Herodotus, and according to the critique, belongs to the genre of rhetorical epideixis. But the fact that it is a formulaic text, or rather a text that obeys particular formulas because of its literary genre and its rhetorical function, does not prevent it from having a historical and literary role as well. This was brought to light in the late 19th century by a German scholar, of course, Ludwig Holzapfel. He demonstrated that in many instances, Plutarch takes account of the criticism published in the treatise to modify the lives. In critiquing Herodotus, Plutarch rereads the histories and reshapes them to create his own version of the Persian wars. Hence, the treatise can be seen as a pars demonstrans, followed, if not chronologically, then at least in theory, by the pars construens of the biographies. Indeed, Plutarch could have worked at the three texts at the same time. I would like to offer two concrete examples of this complex and, to follow my title, angry way of using Herodotus as a source. On the Malice of Herodotus, Plutarch often takes issue with Herodotus when he emphasizes Greek desertion before battle. In particular, in a long passage devoted to recounting the Battle of Plataea, he criticizes Herodotus' deceptive insistence on the Greeks' lack of participation. He recalls that he, I quote, charges them all in general with disobedience, cowardice, and treason, apeiteian kai lipotaxian kai prodosian, equally defrauding all the other cities of their part in the honor of the victory, tas dallas poleis omalos apasas tu catortomatos apestereken, whilst he affirms that no one of them joined in the fight, udena sunefapsastai tu agonos, but that all of them, sitting still are by in their arms, betrayed and forsook Catalipein kai Produnai, those who fought for them. And furthermore, of these treacherous deserting the battle, Herodotus was the only man that ever heard. Tauten ten apestol tes maces Prodosian usam. Next, he opposes this malicious analysis of the battle with the literary Simonides and epigraphic documentation of the era, on which basis he argues that the cities slandered by Herodotus actually distinguished themselves in battle. In that regard, the inscription that he cites proves particularly interesting, as it specifies that the construction of the altar sacred to Zeus, the liberator, was the result of a project common, koinon, to the Greeks. The inscription is also mentioned in the life of Aristeides during the account of the Battle of Plataea, in response to the same statements by Herodotus that Plutarch opposed in the treatise. But in his Plataea, Plutarch does not limit himself to refuting the same malicious opinions using the same documents. He also alters his narrative by incorporating his criticism of Herodotus. In this way, where the histories emphasizes the absence of particular Greek cities during battle, Plutarch's account features Greek unity. This Panhellenic theme is present right from the beginning of the narrative. When Plutarch writes, there Pausanias, also the commander-in-chief of the whole Hellenic army, joined him with his Spartans, and the forces of the rest of the Hellenes kept streaming up. To my mind, the author uses this sentence to focus from the start on the Panhellenic character of the Greek army. He specifies that Pausanias is the commander of all the Greeks, not just of the Spartans. Utu sumpantos egumenos Hellenicou, and dwells on the size of the Greek forces taking part in combat, ton allon Hellenon topletos. Plutarch then reports that to Pausanias and all the Hellenes under him, tois Hellesi koine, Isamenus the Elean made prophecy and foretold victory for them if they act on the defensive and did not advance to the attack. This passage summarizes the much more detailed account that Herodotus provided for this incident. But it is interesting to note the addition of the adverb koine, associating the united Greeks with victory. The theme of Greek unity becomes even more overt as the account continues, with Plutarch stating that surely the total number of those who fell, as well as the monuments erected over them, testifies that the success was a common one. The expression koinon genestai to katortoma is furthermore the exact opposite of tas dallas poles somalos apasas tu katortomatos apestereken, as found on the Malice of Herodotus. Hence, it seems that when describing the Battle of Plataea, Plutarch took note of Herodotus' treatise and deliberately wrote the opposite according to the process just described. In other cases, The relationship with Herodotus seems more complex. For example, on the Malice of Herodotus, Plutarch devotes a long passage to the debates on deploying the army. We can read it together. Again, not knowing what to do with the Athenians, he tosses to and fro that city, sometimes extolling it and sometimes debasing. He says that contending for the second place with the Tegetians, they made mention of the Heraclidi, alleged their acts against the Amazons and the sepulchre of the Peloponnesians that died under the walls of Cadmea, and at last ambitiously brought down their discourse to the Battle of Marathon, saying, however, that they would be contented with the command of the left wing. A little after, he says, Pausanias and the Spartans yielded them the first place, desiring them to fight in the right wing against the Persian and give them the left, who excused themselves as not skilled in fighting against the barbarians. Now, it is a ridiculous thing to be unwilling to fight against an enemy unless one has been used to him. On close examination, it is a little difficult to recognize the object of Plutarch's disapproval. So, to attempt to understand his aim, I thought I should reread the passages in the histories and life of Aristeides that relate these incidents and compare them. On the Malice of Herodotus initially evokes an incident taken from Book 9. Before the Battle of Plataea, the Tegeans and the Athenians, in serious disagreement with each other, deliver long speeches on their past successes in a bid to obtain command of the left flank. This incident is also related in the biography of Aristeides, also more succinctly. Herodotus and Plutarch's texts open with the same atmosphere of discord. In the histories, during the drawing up of battle formation, there arose much dispute, logon pollos putismos, between the Tegeans and the Athenians. In the life now, with the Athenians, the men of Tegea came to strive, Erizantes, regarding their position in the line. Plutarch omits the Tegean speech, but he mentions its theme, ancestral virtue, hence following Herodotus' narrative. On the other hand, in the Athenian speech that we read in Plutarch, several elements clearly deviate from the histories, starting with the identity of the speaker. In the biography, the Athenian speech is delivered not by an anonymous speaker, but by Aristides himself. And it is not an isolated case. In other passages, the protagonists of their biographies play a role that in Herodotus was credited to the Athenians in general. The theme in Aristides' speech are inspired by the last part of that of the Athenians in the histories. The pointlessness of quarreling with allies, stasiazo in both texts, acceptance of the Spartans' decision, promising to fight fervently in battle, perisometa in the histories, perasometa in the biography. On the other hand, the evocation of the city's glorious past, which in Herodotus took up almost the entire passage, is removed, in fact, dismissed outright. As Aristides explains, to argue with the men of Tegea about noble birth and bravery, there is surely no time now, for indeed we are come not to heap praises on our fathers. The removal of a passage praising Athens seems to echo the passage on the Malice of Herodotus that I mentioned just now. In the treatise, Plutarch criticizes Herodotus for having exalted and then belittled Athens. Now, in the biography, the element of exaltation disappears, just as the critical element does a little later. For his version of the disagreement between the Tegeans and the Athenians, Plutarch therefore chose the most conciliatory part of Herodotus' narrative and avoided exalting Athens' past. In this way, he created a new text emphasizing collaboration between Greeks, all while crediting the protagonist of the biography with the role of mediator. But On the Malice of Herodotus also depicted another discussion on the position of the Athenians in the army, this time with the Spartans. The incident is related both in the histories and the life of Aristeides. And once again, some elements in the extract of the biography depart from Herodotus, cited explicitly by Plutarch as a source. In Herodotus, the Spartans asked for a change imposed by putting forward the Athenians' knowledge of the Persians, using the language of knowledge and experience, umeis epistas emeis de aperoi te eimen kai adaes, spartieteon gar udeis pepeiretai medon, emeis de boioton kai Thessalon emperoi eimen. In the life of Aristides, the Spartans express similar thoughts, though in a more nuanced way. While Marathon is no longer cited, Pausanias refers to former victories in general. Hence, attention is no longer focused on knowledge of the enemy, but on the fervor that first contact with the Persians brings. On the Athenian side, Aristides follows a different line of argument to justify this change in the deployment of troops. He affirms the equivalence of barbarian and enemy, all while showing a certain discomfort at the idea of having to fight against Greeks. It seems to me that the theme here are a little anachronistic to Herodotus' era and being delivered by Attic orators. Another criticism stated on the Malice of Herodotus is taken into account in this passage from the life of Aristides. As we have seen, Plutarch begins his treatise by criticizing Herodotus because he tosses Athens to and fro. He then reports the discussions on the Athenians' place in the army. First, those with the Tegeans, then those with the Pausanias and the Spartans, introduced with the expression oligon dusteron. We thus receive the impression that both incidents are in opposition, and that in the dispute with the Spartans, the Athenians are supposed to be belittled. This feeling is made explicit in the biography, where the Athenian strategists deem Pausanias' attitude inconsiderate and annoying. In reality, the Spartans' suggestion is not at all taken as an insult in the histories. Furthermore, the atmosphere of discord and the root of the discussion in the biography is Plutarch's invention. In Herodotus' passage, the Athenians share the Spartans' opinion on changing their position, and the exchange is preceded by an expression of consensus, since both were satisfied with this. os deresque amphoteroisi tauta. This is not Plutarch's only correction. The character of Aristeides, too, is absent from Herodotus, where it is the Athenians who reply to Pausanias. These two changes, dispute replacing the atmosphere of agreement and Aristeides instead of the strategists, led Olsapfel to contend that to create this passage, Plutarch must have used a source other than the histories. Through more recent criticism, considers that Plutarch is indeed following Herodotus here. It is further interesting to note that, thanks to these two insertions, the extract is structured similarly to the other passage from the life of Aristeides discussed previously. A dispute arises regarding the positions that the Greek contingents should take up, and Aristeides intervenes to calm his fellow citizens and ensure that they obey the Spartans. These changes have two functions. Firstly, they allow Aristeides' role as mediator to be emphasized. They aim, therefore, to give prominence to the figure of the protagonist, as is proper to any biography. But they also have served to exalt the suspension of hostilities between the united Greeks against the Persians in a manner coherent with the view that Plutarch presents of the Persian wars, but also of the other Greek wars against the Persians, as we can see in the life of Cimon and the life of Agesilaus. Plutarch's work on Herodotus, hence, also serves to put forward a particular reading of the Persian wars, a function that we could call historical. I believe that these examples are a good illustration of the complex relationship between Plutarch and Herodotus. The treatise on the Malice of Herodotus is certainly a rhetorical work, but also a valuable tool in creating the lives. On the other hand, it is not a manifesto or a legal text that Plutarch is obliged to follow to the letter. Also, even if we accept for a moment that his aim was exclusively to critique the histories, would it have been possible in Plutarch's era to write an account of the Persian wars without using Herodotus? I think we could replace Plutarch's era with our own, and the result would be no different. The Herodotian version of the battles between the Greeks and the Persians is so rooted in the collective imagination that it cannot be dispensed with. But I feel the real problem is not Herodotus' malice. It is rather that in his account of the Persian wars, Plutarch wants to celebrate themes that were still little addressed in Herodotus' era, and that would be spread most of all by Attic orators in the 4th century. We could therefore say that Plutarch Panhellenizes the histories, for example, bringing to the fore Greek unity, or, as it were, the fight to liberate the Greeks in Asia. This process, I feel, is not only the result of a stratification in the conception of the Persian wars, but also belongs to a precisely defined narrative project. The Panhellenic themes serve as a through line uniting all Greek and Roman undertakings against the people of the East. To finish, I feel that this research has allowed me perhaps not to enter, but at least to peer over the threshold of Plutarch's workshop. I'm aware at the same time that it is my workshop as well, which I have shown you, my working methods, my tools, my techniques. I will therefore be delighted to have the chance to hear your advice, your criticism, your doubts, and also your tricks of the trade. Thank you very much.